Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Anacortes City Council meeting of August 12th, 2024. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Mr. Franczak, take the roll, please.
Mr. Fantini.
Here.
Mr. Young.
Here.
Mr. Walters.
Here.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Here.
Ms. Moulton.
Here.
Mr. McDougall.
Here.
Ms. Hubick.
Here.
Thank you.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, announcements and committee reports, I think 3 from me. I just want to thank the police department and especially a special shout out to Brent Lindquist for putting together a great national night out. That was on Tuesday of last week. Spectacular evening, great weather, and celebrating citizens and law enforcement partnership that makes our city safe. And again, T-Bone was a big highlight there as always. Also, earlier today, I attended a groundbreaking ceremony in Cedro Woolley for the Skagit Star Center. Ms. Moulton was there, and it was kind of a culmination of not only some work with North Star, but also the council as part of our legislative priorities. I think it was actually at the top of the list of funding for this. So actually to see something that was in a legislative priority for the city and then something that is actually happening in the same year is pretty impressive for the STAR Center, which is a stabilization, treatment, and recovery center. And I think just to summarize, it's between the hospital and the jail, it's a better place to go for a lot of issues for real time plus long term. So 48-bed facility on that. So great to be part of that. And then lastly, just coming up this weekend, the 17th, Ready to Learn Fair being hosted by Anacortes School District and the Anacortes Schools Foundation. And that's Friday the 17th. And I'm not sure the time, I think maybe 9 to 12, but you'll have to look that up to make sure you get the right times. And that's it for me. And so council reports, Finance Committee is first.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. McDougall.
Thank you. Yeah, the Finance Committee met last, August 8th. Mr. Hoagland, Rhonda Peck, Mayor Miller, and myself were the meeting. The meeting was basically, it was discussion primarily of revenues, expenditures, cash flows. Report from April-May property tax revenue came in, and basically from a gross revenue standpoint, it's a significant bump because of the levy lid lift. Other pieces, they're basically we reviewed the sales and utility tax, and those have basically been flat to down, with July actually being like kind of more significantly down. And basically the finance department is carefully monitoring cash flows and projections for the remainder of the year. So it's I guess there's some nerves, but also it's I guess flat to down. We discussed the upcoming fiber bond and probably the idea. I think the department is looking to do a fiber bond by the end of the year with, the arrangement would be such that the bond goes through the end of the year and first payment wouldn't be due until the beginning of, or till June of 2026 actually. So we'd have this big chunk of time to not have to make payments on that. Let's see, we had a short discussion on the theater, which is on the agenda for later tonight, so I'll skip it. And then we also discussed some water consumption rates and reviewed some Excel charts. So if you're into Excel charts, it was a good one. Basically, refineries up slightly, 1.6%. O'Carbon, LaConner up about 8%. And then the retail system, Anacortes, up like 12%. And really the implication there is increased consumption is generally a good thing for the water utility because, it's ongoing revenue and also revenues for future capital facilities projects. So that's what I got.
All right, any questions? All right, next up is Planning Committee.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
Planning Committee met right before this meeting. We talked about 3 things. First of all, we've drafted an ordinance to deal with some code remnants. That'll be on our agenda next week. It simply reorganizes some things and makes it a little easier to find a couple sections of our development code. We also talked about our list of recommended measures from the Housing Action Plan. As you might recall, Council had a discussion during our docketing discussion about which measures from the Housing Action Plan we might move forward. And so we did a deep dive into each of those, and we've compiled a table of the measures that are in the plan that are changes to the development regulations with a recommendation as to whether that should move forward or whether maybe that's not such a good idea and we don't want to waste time on it. We sent that out to council, and staff will schedule that in the near future for full council discussion. We also talked about an interim ordinance that we're proposing that would adopt some changes to the Permit Procedures Code to set deadlines for processing permit applications, allow the department to expire inactive applications, and then provide permit applicants some options for how to move forward after multiple rounds of review. That ordinance would bring the city into compliance with a new state law that goes into effect January 1. We're waiting for staff review of that ordinance, and then we'll get it in front of council.
All right, any questions? All right, next up is Port City Liaison Committee.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
Port City Liaison Committee met last week. We had a single agenda item that was our new event facility. We talked about our rough cost estimate for the facility and how we can get to a place where we can fund our share of that. Our rough estimate is that the city's share of the new event facility is $8 million, and that's theoretically an amount that can be covered by lodging tax revenue as service to a 30-year bond. So we delved into some of those numbers, as well as some rough estimates of projected revenue from the facility and the operational costs of the facility. And the group was comfortable enough with that to say we should go forward to then draft some interlocal agreements. We envision 2 interlocal agreements that would come to council and the Port Commission to talk about what's next. Where do we go from here? And so those will be our next steps on that. Then there was a round robin, as there usually is, where department heads, both city and the port, discussed what they're working on.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Young.
Just a follow-up question from Mr. Walters in the Port City Liaison Committee. In your discussion of the event center and funding and everything else, I know that this is so early, and part of it is just trying to figure out, can we afford it? How will we afford it? And I guess my question is the port and the city discussing possible public-private partnerships? Or, you know, I guess my concern is that LTAC dollars largely will be allocated toward an event center. That's wonderful and what we need and will attract. But, you know, again, I think I just want to make sure we're including a public-private partnership, maybe some, you know, philanthropists that are here in our area. It may be something that we should do and look at. You know, naming rights is just one example. But at the end of the day, I just want to make sure that that's part of the discussion. And can you assure me that is?
Mayor Miller?
Yes, Mr. Walters.
Yes, there have been some efforts, I think, that the mayor has pursued to obtain some private funding for it. In terms of a public-private partnership, typically we think more in terms of some private entity running it or something like that, and that's not part of the discussion. But in terms of donations to facilitate the cost of the facility, yes, we have had some of those discussions. But they may or may not be very likely to amount to a significant portion of the cost.
But I'm happy if you're interested in becoming a partner with the city that way, please give me a call. All right, any other questions? All right, next up is Public Safety Committee.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Thank you. We had our public safety meeting August 6th. Chief Floyd was there. The main thing we discussed with the police department was the crime in Washington report that was published. I believe it was also sent out to all of council to review. But the highlights were we saw property crime saw a large decrease from 2022 to 2023. Motor vehicle kind of car prowls were down 67% and back to kind of pre-pandemic levels, so that's positive. Burglaries had a decrease about 45%. General theft was down about 25%. And then another kind of exciting thing is that the case clearance rate, so cases that are actually solved, was up to was at 38% and was up 10, which was about 10% over the previous year. Drug enforcement cases have had a huge increase, a lot to do with the fact that some of the laws that had been passed in 2020, 2021 were refined or modified. So in 2022, we had about 48 drug enforcement cases, and then in 23, it was about 94. So it's, I think, a positive direction across the board. We've hired about 7 police officers. 6 have done really well and are continuing through. We lost 1, unfortunately, but was to no fault, just wasn't quite the right fit for our department. And then we had Captain Burbank representing the fire department. Call volume's up again. We've kind of seen it up all year, so it was about 5%. Our 4th unit is up and running, and it's been going on for about a month, and it's going well, but as we start to see those folks be able to be a little more independent, it'll function better. As you know, you've got to have some extra partnering happening as the new firefighters get up and running. And our ladder truck is having a little bit of an issue, so it is in Mount Vernon. I actually saw it when I was driving on I-5. Transmission issue is going to hopefully getting addressed, and then there will be a 3-day training from the manufacturer coming out in September. I think that's about it.
Any questions for Public Safety Committee? All right, next is Economic Development Committee.
Miller.
Mr. Young.
Thank you. The Economic Development Committee met on last week, the 9th. In attendance was Councilman McDougall, Councilwoman Amanda Hubick, myself. Of course, the staff was there. We had, several stakeholders that we had invited to an initial meeting just to sort of tell where we are. And at that meeting was the Downtown Alliance, Jordan Hayes, Samish Indian Nation Chairman Wooten, and 2 of one of the elders, as well as one of the key staff, Justin Irish from the school district, and also the Samish CFO. And, also I had a great conversation with Marathon prior to about where we are, what we're doing. The whole goal of that meeting, again, as I've said before, is to sort of give a synopsis as to where we are and that we're finally gaining our sea legs as an Economic Development Committee, and the goal is to begin to understand what are the individual challenges as well as collective challenges. And I think I spoke last time about our first meeting. One of the things to come out was, again, several of the major stakeholders, largest employers, were all having issues with childcare, all of their employees. And so that was one of the things to come out informally. At this meeting, it was another item to come out, and I think that part of it was we were able to talk bluntly with one another about what we thought should be taking place. The goal, again, is to have everybody submit their thoughts, their ideas, their challenges, things that we may be able to wrestle with. And one of the things that came out that I know we already may have individually known, but it was a little surprising for me, and I'll give Bruce and Amanda the chance to chime in if they want to. Part of it is that, we were talking about Anacortes truly being the gateway to the San Juan Islands. So when we were talking about economic benefit, the question was, how do we also recognize the pivotal play that our city plays, whether it's the hospital or, just food, everything else that's happening here. So that came out pretty good. We discussed a little bit about the opportunity for the event center space and benefit programming, but And again, our next meeting now was to really sort of get the initial seeding of thoughts from these stakeholders as we continue our stakeholder meetings and span out. We will again meet with Western in days to come and sort of go over some of the initial findings and then begin to look at what our survey will be, what we're hoping to gain by, how we would go out it. Some of the big issues that I honestly think we might have some answers to is, you know, why people go off island. I said that before, but with remote work and supercomputers, it also creates a great opportunity for us. And so Bruce spoke a little bit, if you won't mind, Bruce, on the benefit, the tie-in benefit we get from having our own fiber at that high level.
Mr. McDougall?
So I'm turning it over to you, Bruce.
Okay, yeah, as part of the kickoff discussion, that was one of the things that we highlighted was the fiber optic network actually really does give us kind of a competitive advantage as a community as far as attracting businesses and human capital were kind of two key pieces. And then of course, as we're like sort of nearing the end of construction in the next year or so, basically the fiber network is today turning a profit in the sense that it's bringing in more revenue than the actual operational costs, and should be turning a profit even when paying sort of the monthly bond bill as well. So it's a net positive revenue stream in addition to those sort of competitive advantage aspects.
And the reason I wanted Bruce to say, and in case Amanda wanted to jump in, the whole thing is looking at the advantages we have as a city and using those to the greater good of what we're looking for here. And so, you know, those are just part of where we are beginning this process. And again, we'll meet with Western next week and begin the process of determining what are our next steps, and we'll keep you informed of that. Anything you want to add, Amanda? Thank you.
Any questions? Okay, any other announcements and committee reports I may have missed? All right, we'll move on to item number 4, which is public comment. Any member of the public wishes to address the council on anything that's not on our agenda, this would be a good time to do so. I do have one person signed up, but it's on item 6C, so if you want to wait for that, I'll be sure to call you out. But anything else that's not on our agenda? Okay, we will move on to item 5, which is our consent agenda, items A through C. Council.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Hubick.
Thank you. Make a motion to approve consent agenda items A, B, and C.
Mayor Miller, quick
Mr.
question, sorry.
Fantini.
So there's an item on here, item C for the senior center, and this is just kind of a process question. I know I sit on the board as well as Mr. Walters for the senior center. Is this a vote that we need to abstain from?
It's a good question, which means we would remove it from the consent agenda for discussion first, probably.
I think typically we have had council members abstain from votes on those items, so thanks for bringing that up.
So if you want to maybe amend your motion, Ms.
I
Hubick?
amend my motion, and my motion is now to approve consent agenda items A and B and move C to a separate line item.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, a motion to, by Ms. Hubick and a second by Mr. Young to approve consent agenda items A and B. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, item 5C, a contract award with the senior center. And if there's any discussion on that, or we can just take it to a vote at this point.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
Mr. Fantini and I are members of the Senior Center Foundation, which is in part funding this agenda item. We don't receive any benefit from it. So I was not intending to recuse myself.
Okay, well then I think I can take a motion to approve it, and if you want to abstain or not, you can.
Mayor Miller,
Ms. Moulton.
I move to approve item 5C.
Okay, a motion by Ms. Moulton, a second by Ms. Hubick to approve consent agenda item 5C. And Mr. Franciac, will you take the vote on that one, please?
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath,
Yes.
Ms. Moulton,
Yes.
Mr. McDougall,
Yes.
Ms. Hubick,
Yes.
Mr. Fantini. Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Next item is, we're on to item 6, which is other business. And our first item up that Mr. Lee will introduce our guest, and this is on the pavement management program. So pavement management presentation. And Mr. Lee, if you want to introduce this.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Earlier this year, the city hired Capital Asset and Pavement Services to assess the city's current pavement conditions and develop a pavement management system. This evening, we have Joel Conder with us to present their findings.
Welcome.
City Council. Thank you for having me here this evening. As Logan said, my name is Joel Conder, and I'm with Capital Asset and Pavement Services. We're an engineering firm based out of Salem, Oregon. And this is my third trip to talk to the Anacortes City Council in the last 10, 12 years. So I don't see a lot of familiar faces here, so must have had some turnover here. So anyway, I just love coming up to Anacortes. It's my favorite place to come of all of our jobs. So I love your city. So with that, I'll go ahead and jump into this short presentation. It's basically talking about your pavement condition index, or your PCI, that I will use that acronym a little bit here in the next few minutes. It's basically the status of your streets. And we do this all the way from the Canadian border down to the Mexican border, up and down the West Coast, Arizona, Montana, Idaho. So we're a Western regional-based company. I look at your guys' score, and we'll talk about your PCI score as we get into this. And I'll tell you right now that you guys are right in the middle of the road as far as the condition of your pavement compared to all the other cities up and down the West Coast. So, which is a good thing, because most of these I've been doing lately, I've been giving bad news. So yours is not definitely bad news. So what is a pavement management system? I'll quickly talk about that. It's just a computer system. It's an inventory system that we use, and we can do a lot of analysis with it. We can do a lot of budgeting with it. We can put a lot of what-if scenarios into it and say, what if we spend this much money? What's the bang that we get for our buck? And so a lot of agencies like that, so we can play with those scenarios, and I'm going to show you a few of the scenarios that we were asked to run for you guys. It'll also show you the decisions that you make, if they pay off or not. It's like, okay, well, 5 years ago when Joel was here, he asked us to do this. Did it actually come to fruition? And so it's a wonderful tool. The pavement condition index, it's 0 to 100. So when you talk about a road that's a 0, that's a road that's gone back to gravel. And believe me, we have found roads, especially in a lot of the counties, rural counties, we find a lot of roads that have gone from pavement, the lack of maintenance, they've gone all the way down to a 0. 100 PCI would be obviously a brand new street. So the software we're using is called Street Saver, and it's the preferred choice software here on the West Coast. Most of I'd say probably 70% of the cities in the state of Washington, and 90% of the cities in the state of Washington, and almost 100% of the cities in the state of California use the same system you do. So we're definitely comparing apples to apples wherever we go here. So your current PCI is 73. The ideal PCI for a city would be in the mid-80s, so you can kind of see where you're at. There's not a lot of agencies that we visit that are up there in the mid-80s. There's a couple, not very many. One of the examples I use is the city of Mountain View down in California, where Google is based, and they put so much money into that city. If they get a crack on their road, they want to know. And they will actually dispatch a crew out there to cut it out and fix it. We will not have any cracks on any streets. It just amazes me. So that's what happens when you have too much money. But in real life, we know that's not the way it really is. So looking at your network, you can see that your arterials, you have about 23 miles of roads that are arterials, 17 miles that are collectors, and about 87 miles of residential or local roads. So most of your city obviously is made up of residential local roads. You guys know that. The condition category, you can see that about 3/4 of your network is in good condition. That means it has a PCI of 70 or above. So, and that's a pretty good score. You only have about 18% of your network that's in poor or very poor. And again, that's a high number. That number should be closer to 3 or 4%. So your roads are either really good or really bad. There's not a lot in between. So, and you guys probably knew that. I knew that coming in here today, driving over a few things. So this pavement deterioration curve is just kind of a quick lesson in pavement management. It basically tells you you want to fix your roads when they're in good condition, not let them wait until they fall apart. And you can see by this number up here that it costs about $27,000 a lane mile to fix roads that are in good condition, or about $50,000 a mile for a 2-lane road. And you can see if you let it drop down into the poor condition or very poor condition, that number jumps up to $500,000 a mile. So you can see this, the cost of waiting. That's why I kind of call this the pay me now or pay me later graph here. So here's a couple of the scenarios we ran for you guys. The first one we did is the unconstrained needs. And this is kind of what I call the blank check theory. It's like if the city of Anacortes had all the money in the world to fix their streets, this is what it would take. It'd take $31.9 million over 10 years. So that's, $3.2 million a year you'd be needing to spend. And that would get your PCI up. You can see it goes up into the mid-80s there by the year 2033, 10 years from now. So that's the blank check. We all know that doesn't happen. Scenario 2 is your current investment level. And you can see right now you're spending $22.6 million over 10 years. Or $2.2 million a year, significantly less than what they're asking you, $1 million a year less than you need to be. So, but it does increase your PCI about 4 points over the next 10 years if you keep your current funding level like it is. So, and those red bars on the bottom, those are your deferred maintenance dollars. You can see right away where right now in 2024, we're about $5 million in deferred maintenance. But you're going to spend this money over the next 10 years. Your deferred maintenance is going to continue to grow, and you can see it goes over $12 million at the end of this 12 years. So you're definitely not spending enough money on your roads. Your needs are going to continue to grow as time goes on. Scenario 3 is just maintaining our current PCI. What's it going to cost to just maintain what we have today? And so so the city of Anacortes, their pavement condition index will be 73 10 years from now. It's going to cost you about $2 million a year, or $19 million over the 10-year basis. But you can also see that PCI is going to go down. You're going to be losing ground over here by doing this. So we put the 3 scenarios together here just for your comparison. You can kind of see the dollars that are needed to spend on the left-hand side, and you can kind of see what happens with these different scenarios. And this is just kind of a graph where we combine it so the engineering folks can get an idea of where they're going and do some future forecasting for them. Again, those numbers on the bottom are deferred maintenance, and you can see those red bars are still up there pretty high, but if you spend a little bit more money, your deferred maintenance is dropping, and you can see by the end of the 10-year that your deferred maintenance is dropping underneath $5 million. So you would definitely be gaining ground there. So and one of the scenarios that folks ask us to run is like, okay, we can't increase our PCI 10, 13 points over this time, but what if we just shoot for something more realistic, like increase it 5 points? And this is what it would cost you, about $2.3 million a year, a little bit more than you're spending right now, but that would get you there. And a PCI, a network PCI of 78 would be very good. It'd put you guys in the upper half road conditions for cities in northern Washington. This is our current PCI condition. So this is a map, and a lot of cities will use this and put this on their website for folks to look at, and the people call up and, hey, my street's terrible, how's it compared to the rest of the city? Well, here's a great look at it. So anything that's red or orange is a street that's in poor condition or very poor condition. So the more red and the more orange you have on there, the worse it is. So that's your current network, and you can kind of see the parts of the city that are green are obviously the newer parts of the city. So that's why they're green. We run this is unconstrained. This is that blank check scenario, and you can see pretty much all your roads turn green. So you won't have any needs if you were to spend that $31.9 million over the next 10 years. So here's a scenario 2. This is our current funding level. And just kind of keep an eye as I flip through these maps, the colors of the streets. And you can see that there's still some red and orange, not a lot, but there is some in there under the current funding. And the next one is to maintain the current PCI at 1.9 million. You can see that we still have a lot of red, and it seems like it's downtown. It's a lot of your older streets. It's a lot of those PCC or Portland cement concrete streets. They're not asphalt, they're concrete, very old, cracked, broken. and that's where a lot of those red streets show up there. So increased funding, you can see now they start to go away. We increase our funding a little bit. Some of those red roads are diminishing. We go to the next one. You can see the increased funding again at 2.5 instead of 2.2 or 2.3. You can see we're really kind of gaining ground, and those red and orange roads are disappearing. The increased funding at 2.7, you can see we almost got everything taken care of there. We're getting pretty close. So just kind of gives you an idea of your current funding at 2.2. If you were to throw another $500,000 into your network annually, this would be the bang you'd get for your buck. You'd almost get rid of all those red streets in there. So, and here's the 5 points. If you try to increase your network 5 points, here's what it looks like. See, but you can still see there's a lot of poor roads in there. The next set of maps I'm going to show you here are the scenario treatments. And these are the ones that kind of show you, if you look at the legend over there on the left, whether we're going to do a grind and inlay, are we going to replace the street, dig it out, are we just putting a cap over it, just an inch or 2 inch overlay over it. These are the different funding, scenarios that your engineering department uses currently to maintain your streets. So you can kind of see what's going to happen here based on that legend. This is the type of treatment that the streets would be getting. And again, a lot of folks will put this map on their city website as well, because you can now tell the folks when they call in, I live out here on this street, what's the plan? You can see exactly what type of treatment and what year that it's selected for. So, and here's another one on the current funding. Again, you can see there's a lot of red roads on there. So, excuse me, but again, we have all the treatments listed right there. And this is the maintain, and these are all the different scenarios I was telling you about, the increased funding, and the 2.2 to 2.5 to 2.7, and here's the last one, the increase at 5 points. So that's a lot to take in, and I don't like to take up a lot of your time. I just wanted to kind of give you the rundown real quick on the status of your streets. And so I've kind of combined it right here in this budget scenario data, and you can see right here the amount of money, the amount of the effect it has, and you can also see your deferred maintenance, what happens if we spend this much money, and then what percent of the network is good and what percent is poor, and you can see you really gain ground when you do put some money back into your system. So that's about all I have, and I'm ready for questions if you have any.
Oh yeah, I know you're going to get questions.
Oh, I figured I would.
And I'm going to start only because, yeah, I was probably one of the familiar faces asking about 0 versus 100. Are there any brand new streets that are built and don't get 100?
Yeah, there are a few based on the workmanship of your contractors, and I've been out on quite a few projects in my career on streets that are brand new, and they just paved these 2 months ago or 3 months ago, and it's rattling and coming apart. And we've, like the city holds a lot of bonds, and they hold the contractors to it. So yes, there are, not very often.
And then on the other end, 0, you said gravel, but doesn't mean it's impassable.
Yeah, it's not impassable. There are some streets that have PCIs in the single digits. They're still passable, but you wouldn't want to drive your car down it.
Because I know council loves maps, and I love maps too. Some of your maps showed Highway 20, which also commercial, and it's our number one complaints that I get about Commercial Avenue. Sometimes it showed green, obviously where it was overlaid a few years ago, but I couldn't quite see on the map commercial going through downtown what color that was on the map.
Is that a city street or
It is a WashDOT State Route Highway.
Okay.
But I noticed that sometimes it was green on Highway 20 coming out of town, but it wasn't on the Highway 20 going through
Yeah, it was quite a
town.
few years ago. The first time we did the assessment of your city, that wasn't included. Okay. And I was asked the second time we did the assessment to please include that. Okay. But being as a WashDOT road, it can be included on the maps, but it can be not part of the funding scenario. So we'll dismiss that and say, okay, that's definitely not a City of Anacortes need, but the City of Anacortes wants to be able to hold WashDOT accountable and say, okay, this street's in this condition. So
okay, sorry, sorry, council, for taking your questions, but actually, members of the public that wish to ask any questions before I turn it over to council. This is open for, okay, council.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters and then Mr. McDougall.
We are considering doing pavement on South Commercial Avenue, either through a grant program, or if we don't get money through a grant program, maybe self-funding it. So if we did that, we would assumedly spend 2 years worth of pavement management revenues. What would that do to your projections if we took a 2-year hiatus from doing all the other streets?
And
to
just
focus on.
and just save the money and bankroll it? Is that what you're saying?
Well, to spend it on the state's responsibility, which is South Commercial Avenue.
Well, that's a scenario we can run. We definitely can. We'd have to put that in and run it through the program and see what it does. So am I following you right that you're going to take the money that you spend on your city streets and just put it in this pool?
I'm saying that's a potential scenario.
Right. Okay.
Take that money and spend it on a non-city street.
Right.
That means South Commercial. So that would assumedly, have 2 more years of degraded
Right.
every other street.
Yes.
And what does that do to the scenarios?
Just off the top of my head, based on my own personal knowledge, anytime you kick the proverbial can down the road, your maintenance dollars are going to definitely go up because of obviously inflation and time and everything else. So it probably wouldn't have a huge impact. I mean, we definitely can run that report for you and put that in and send it to you. You guys could take a look at it, but I don't think it'd have a huge impact on your network, knowing your network the way I do. I've been up and down every street in the city multiple times, so.
And maybe it's only 1 year's worth of revenue, who knows?
Right.
We don't know about that at this point, but it seems like it would be it'd take to zero what we spend on all the other streets
Right.
for some period of time. I'm also wondering that your scenario where you say we increase funding to 2.5 million annually, my sense is our long-term average funding is more like 1.8 million, not 2.2 or whatever you had on one of the slides. I think that's maybe our current year budgeted amount.
Right.
But if we take it to 2.5, you get almost all of those streets to be green. There's one I noticed that stays red, kind of near the top of the island there.
Right.
That's K Avenue, which is concrete road base.
Right.
Can someone, and maybe it's not you, maybe it's others from Public Works, but can you tell me why we can't do K?
The cost of it, the cost of fixing that street is so prohibitive. The program will sit there and say, do not spend all your dollars right here on this street, because we can go treat these 10 streets over here and take care of them. This street's already bad. It's kind of dead is dead. It's not going to go anywhere.
And that's what I understand. But physically, mechanically, why can't you do it? It's got a concrete
Your
base,
budget.
right?
It's your budget.
No, I understand. Physically on the ground, what is different about repaving that street versus any other normal street?
What's different
you have
about
to dig up 6 inches of concrete, 12 inches of concrete, 24 inches of concrete. What physically do you have to do?
Okay, so that's a project level assessment there that have to be done. When we do a network level assessment, we look at all your streets over the entire network. So to answer your question about K Street and what it would cost and what's the proper fix, it would take more of a project level analysis done on that street to see what's underneath it, how bad is this concrete, all this kind of stuff. Can we pave over it without even moving the concrete? And maybe we just level it and then pave over. That's a project level thing. So.
Yeah.
And that's probably best answered by your own staff.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer. I just wish we had a project level answer for that street, because we just never get to it.
Right.
Because the assumption is it's impossible to do with current finances.
Right.
I just think we shouldn't be writing off any of our streets. We should have a solution for all of them.
Right.
Regardless of the number, we need to at least know what we're getting into. Mr. McDougall.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Condor, for the presentation. I don't know if I was here the last couple times, but do you recall, were we in the same range as far as 73 score previously?
Well,
Have we improved our score? Because
You have improved your score.
Okay.
The last time I was here it was 71.
It was 71.
So you're definitely trending in the right direction.
Okay.
And it seems to me, and before that, I know the very first time I was here, you guys were in the 60s.
Okay.
So you're definitely trending up. But I think a
Great.
lot of that has to do with the fact that you've invested in a payment management system, you're inventorying, you're tracking it, and that kind of holds your engineering department accountable. So.
Yeah. And voters approved a funding model as well. So this, that is good. It's trending well. But really, under the current funding model, it looks like we probably peak out in the 75 to 77 range.
Yes, as we look at as we get through this 10-year scenario, if you're following it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You bet.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Young?
Yes, thank you. I'm looking on the slides. I know you, first of all, thank you for the presentation. It's always illuminating when we look at this and look at the pavement index to see where they are. Is it possible to have a slide that just shows the pavements that are poor and very poor? I guess.
A slide?
Well, just like you have this scenario right here, each of them with different scenarios of money showing green,
Right.
The different colors. I was just curious if there's possible to have a slide, one that shows just the roads that are poor and very poor.
Yes, definitely,
Okay.
within,
All right.
and that's a very easy ask.
Okay.
And we'd be glad, so when I get back to the office tomorrow morning, I'll make
Thank
sure
you.
and send it along to
Yeah,
Logan for you.
I would be curious about that as well, because again, for me, I really appreciate the fact that we're above a certain level. I really appreciate the fact that we're willing to maintain that, and that maintaining that comes at cost.
Right.
Sometimes when you only have limited budgets, about making, other roads. My concern, though, is, at least for us as a city, is that those very people are also paying money toward roads, and at some point we can't ignore them. And how do we balance out maintaining the major thoroughfares that we want to, but also addressing the needs of those other roads in communities that are in desperate need of some repair? I think that the onus is on us to try to do that as best as we can and not ignore it. I know that's not your issue, but I guess I'm sort of putting that out there to the team and to the staff. I believe they do an incredible job, but I just really, I'm going to look a little bit deeper at that, and I'd love to be able to see those numbers. And then, again, I know if we could only pull money out from the sky,
Right.
My hand would be up, and I'm sure I'd tell you how to do it too. But okay, thank you. I would appreciate that.
You bet. Most of this, I get this question almost every single time I stand up here at every jurisdiction I go to, is how do we get up to those roads that are really bad? They're not a major thoroughfare. There's a local residential road. It's really bad, and it doesn't really serve that many people. So how do we justify spending this much money to fix that road? So what a lot of the cities are doing now, and the counties, are they're taking those roads that are very bad like that serve very few, and they're starting these little side pots, and they're pulling out 2% or 3% of their overlay budget every year and putting it in here and say, okay, so when those folks call the mayor and say, hey, I'm a little upset, I live on this street and it's not being fixed, it's the worst street in the city, what are you going to do about it? And they can always come back, well, we've started a fund, we've got you on the radar, it's coming down the road, and we're starting a fund. And they really do, they start this little fund and just start stocking away money for it.
That's a great point. The last little point I want to make is, truly our staff have, with the equipment they've been asking each time, they've been able to do some amazing things with little or no money themselves. So I wanted to applaud that in this conversation because I think it's important. Thank you, Mayor.
Yep. Thanks.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. So I did, to Mr. Walters' point, that we're operating as if, or at least this, thank you for your presentation, by the way.
Oh, you're welcome.
As if that 2.1 is our normal spending, which it's not. Like 1.8 is what we've committed to, and sometimes it's 1.4, and I think this is a makeup year, so we're doing 2.1. So I mean, even at 1.8 million, I mean, do you think that that's still roughly what you're showing us is still going to be roughly that, or should we be, as a council, thinking about raising what we spend per year based on what we're learning tonight?
Right. So when we talk about the 1.8 or 1.9, and then we're running a 10-year scenario, we all know that in 5 years or 8 years, it's not going to be 1.9 or 1.8. We know that. And we know the cost of construction, we know the cost of everything, and these last few years has gone insane. So yes, to answer your question, yes, you need to be increasing that pot, definitely, because at your current funding level, you will start losing ground. There's no doubt about it, and you need to start thinking about that. And I don't know if you guys have done, I didn't ask Logan if you guys have done any projects yet this year and seen the cost, 20, 30% cost from last year. It's unbelievable. And we know that everywhere we go. And so when you talk about construction, the costs are just out of control right now. And how they're going to be reined in, I don't know. But yeah, I'm giving everybody the same picture. In 2025, it's probably going to be up again. So,
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
So to follow up on that, and that was one of my questions too, can you talk about how your projections here account for inflation or not? Because our allocation set back when we switched from our $20 car tab to our 0.2% sales tax and adopted a new pavement management resolution, our annual allocation has been 1.8 million. Of course, inflation has been more than zero over that 10 years. I think it's been 10 years since we first created the Transportation Benefit District. And so it eats away at that number. And originally, I think we were doing 1.1 million, and then we changed it and switched it up to 1.8 million. We haven't always achieved 1.8 million. This year, we're doing more. In prior years, we did less. But if on average, we're doing 1.8, and I think it is on average less than 1.8, but say it's 1.8. 1.8 is worth less this year than it was 10 years ago or 6 years ago, whenever we switched to 1.8. So your charts here don't talk about inflation. It's been missing in our projections internally as well.
Right.
How do we accommodate that? Like inflation this year might, like just CPI might be very low,
Right.
but it hasn't been in the last couple of years.
Right.
And I don't know if CPI correlates to the construction cost of pavement overlays.
It does.
Does it?
Yep, it does.
Okay, well, so that's a really good data point
Yep.
to have to begin with. But so how do you address it here, or do you address it?
We do
these
address
just
it.
nominal?
Yes, within the program, within the pavement management program, there's an inflation factor number that we're asked to put in. And most times we will ask the jurisdiction what number they're comfortable with. And a lot of people give me the, huh, what? We don't know what, we don't know. So we do a lot of regional work. So we take the county, we take WashDOT, we take other cities, and we take all the cities and there's jurisdictions in your area and look at their cost for the construction. So we pull their bid tabs from the year before and look at the cost, and then we look at anything that's been bid this year. And so we kind of get a regional price and figure out how much it's going up a year, and that number is the number we plugged in. And I know with your program, when we ran it this year, it was 6.8% is what we factored in on the inflation factor. So what this program do, it'll take that 6.8% over the next 10 years. Every year, annually, it will be adding it. So when we look at the...
Is that a reasonable assumption, that
I'd say right now...
always be 6.8%?
In this region, yes, I'd say. You guys are not as near as bad as some of the other regions. You go to Seattle and see what your numbers are. It's almost double that.
But we expect that'll continue for the entirety of the 10-year model?
Yeah, that's a guesswork again. It's like this crystal ball, this program is. It's looking 10 years out. We don't know where we're going to be in 10 years. We don't know who's going to be on the city council. We don't know who's going to be in engineering. We don't. But we're doing this future forecasting is just kind of like giving you an idea of what's coming on. So that inflation is 6.8% was built into yours over a 10-year period. So annually it will increase.
And so just for clarity on how this works, your captions on your model pages here say that you're going to spend $2.5 million over 10 years. Does that mean $2.5 million appears in the budget for each of those 10 years?
Yes.
And it just buys 6% less each year?
Exactly.
Okay, good.
You got it.
That's all I need
You
to
got
know,
it.
and just in terms
I wish
of
it
the
wasn't that
mechanics
way.
of it.
So
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
you guys should have paid more during COVID. That was an unbelievable time to be paving because the prices just fell. Like we were like 1992 prices on oil for asphalt. And there was nobody on the roads. Everybody was staying home, so it was easy to work on them, and everybody was paving, and so.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Fantini.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. This council loves a good map, so I'm glad you provided several of them for us. As I'm taking a look at some of these, so I think it's already been established that we average about 1.8 million in what we're doing for our roads. I saw on here that the 5 PCI, to increase the PCI by 5 points, which would bring us up into that 80 number, slightly above 80. Is that
right?
Is $2.3 million a year. So that would be like an increase of 500,000. Is that what I'm understanding?
Is this the graph you're looking at? Oh, you guys can't see the one I'm looking at right here.
I'm actually, yes,
Okay.
that's one of them. But then I look at the map, and the map of what we're doing now compared to what it would be like if we were doing that 2.3 million, which is is pretty significant.
Sure. It's $500,000 a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very significant.
And then I also just wanted to clarify, because there is a lot of talk around Commercial Avenue and repaving Commercial Avenue, and I don't think there's any settled way on how it's going to be paid for yet. I don't think that's been decided. But did I hear you correctly that you don't feel that that would necessarily be a huge detriment to the long-term ability of us to be able to maintain our roads? That wouldn't set us back like if we did that, that's not going to set us back like 5 years or anything?
It's not, and the main reason it's not is because you don't have a lot of those roads that are teetering on the good to poor. And a lot of jurisdictions I work with, they're aging out because these cities were built, and then all of a sudden they grew, and in the late 1990s, early 2000s, everything was growing and expanding. And a lot of cities, that's 3/4 of their network. And you guys aren't like that. You guys have grown, slower than that. So you don't have a lot of those roads that are teetering. So if we kick the can down the road a year or two, that are going to fall into that really expensive fix. So no, to answer your question, no, you guys would be fine by banking that for a couple of years and doing it. You'd be fine.
And then one other question. So when I had met with our Public Works Director, he showed me this giant book that has all the roads in it and what their PCI is and when they should be replaced.
Right.
Does that come from your?
It does.
So that's what we're talking.
Yes.
Just to kind of zoom this out for me a little bit. That comes from
us. Yes.
So with what you've done here, the one that we've been looking at, or that I've been looking at for the past few months, are we getting a new one now, or is this based off of that report?
That's an internal question you'd have to ask your engineering staff. We provide that information.
Got it.
So, and a lot of times the engineering staff will call us up and say, hey, can we get, it's called sections selected for treatment.
Right.
And so here's the next 10 years of every street that's selected for treatment, what type of treatment, and what year. Yes, if they call us up and ask for that, we'll be glad to produce that for you. We'll email it the same day.
Okay, and then one other question. So you had mentioned in the beginning of your presentation that when you come here, you've obviously been here before. You give us recommendations of what we should do, and then we do some of them. We don't do some of them. Have you seen that we've taken some of your recommendations? Like, what were your recommendations last time, and did we take them? Did they improve? Like,
that's the first thing we do. We want to see if you guys are following the plan or how close you're following the plan. We all know you can't follow it 100%. There's all sorts of other decisions that are made, development, all that kind of stuff. You can't follow the plan 100%. What we're doing is just giving you this plan to go out, but there's always going to be that human intervention that's going to change this or do this, or we can't do this year because of this or that. So what we do, we take that old report and we run it over the top of the new one, and we see what you guys have done. And you guys have done a great job. It's close to 80%. You guys have followed the plan. And that's, again, why your PCI is moving in an upward direction, because you guys have been really good about following the plan. So
yeah, I might sound like a financial advisor saying past performance is no guarantee of future performance. But looking at the past about what we've spent and that relationship to our current PCI condition, I think is really important for when council is going to have to make the decision about how much we're going to have to stay on good glide slope.
Right.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you again for the great presentation.
Very much.
Appreciate it.
You bet.
Okay, next up is 6B, and this is Resolution 3162. This is waiving competitive bidding requirements for a wastewater treatment plant, NOV, Mono, positive displacement pumps, parts, and components. This is a discussion item with possible action. And Mr. Walker, you're already here.
Good evening, Council. Tonight we are asking for approval of a sole source resolution naming NOV Moino as a sole source provider for our Moino branded equipment. Down in the basement of the solids building, we have an engineered series of equipment, pumps and augers that move the pressed solid cake towards the incinerator. And like much of our equipment, it's been turning in circles all day, every day for a long number of years, and it's time to start replacing it. We have had some other pump reps come and take a look at that equipment. The cost of changing brands for any component of that system is prohibitive, so we're seeking to stick with Moino at this point.
All right. Questions for Mr. Walker, Council?
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton.
Hearing none, I felt like this was very well presented and very obvious that we need to do it. So I move that Resolution 3162 be approved, waiving the competitive bidding requirements for the purchase of the No Moino brand positive displacement pumps, parts, and components from National Oil Well Varco LP for use by the Anacortes wastewater treatment plant.
Second.
A motion by Ms. Moulton and a second by Mr. Young to approve Resolution 3162. Any additional discussion? Mr. Franciac, vote please.
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Ms. Hubick.
Yes.
Mr. Fantini.
Yes.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, item 6C, other business. This is movie theater purchase and sale agreement, and this is an action item. And Ms. Swetnam, you didn't have nearly enough time to get over there to put the presentation up, but Ms. Swetnam will be
I'll
presenting.
start running down here. All right, thank you, Mayor Miller, members of council, and members of the public. So tonight I am presenting an action item for council to approve a purchase and sale agreement for the Anacortes Cinemas movie theater building. I know we like maps, so this map shows the location of the property. This, if you can see my cursor, this building kind of on the bottom of the screen is the movie theater building itself, and it is on top of a land parcel that is owned by the city and adjacent to another parcel also owned by the city where there is a parking lot that is used for the movie theater but also available to the public. Because there's a number of parties, the status of the ownership interest at this point is that the city owns the land underlying the building. Radius Anacortes Properties LLC owns the building, and they sublease the building out to Faraway Entertainment, who operates the movie theater. So the mayor and staff have worked with the seller to negotiate the terms of a purchase and sale agreement by which the city would purchase the building subject to the existing lease. The purchase price agreed upon is $500,000. The offer includes a 30-day feasibility period where the city would evaluate certain things and then assess moving forward to closing once that 30-day period had closed. The sale is contingent on the city's satisfaction with the continued lease between the subtenant, which again is Faraway Entertainment, and the city as to the operation of the movie theater, and that issue would need to be resolved during that 30-day feasibility period. The offer includes that closing would happen on or before 30 days after the approval of the feasibility study. So a couple of things would be evaluated during that feasibility study period. First of all, the building would get an inspection to evaluate the building itself and the systems to identify whether there are any significant issues. There would also need to be a discussion with the current tenant to determine whether he would be willing to continue to operate the theater business for 5 years to provide income to cover debt service on the purchase price. And then the finance director is currently evaluating the financing strategy for the purchase itself. So those would be the things that, if the purchase and sale is executed, that would be evaluated during that feasibility period. So those are all of my comments. I'm happy to answer questions, and I'm sure there are some. So.
And maybe before we turn it over to council for questions and debate, I have at least one member of the public that signed up to address the council on this subject. But if anybody else, but Linda Martin, I have you on here for cinema.
Linda Martin, Anacortes. I am coming to speak as taxpayer, And I do recall, I know that the theater, the cinema has been an issue for a number of years. I recall, I believe it was in March or so when this was brought up again, and I recall all of you saying that you really wanted to make sure that the theater stayed, the cinema stayed. And on a split vote, you did not vote to change the lease that the owner was asking for. You know that she has wanted to sell for a long time. Here's my question. As a taxpayer, I am thinking about what is the purpose of a city? Is the purpose to run a movie theater? I always thought it was to do things like public safety, like, you know, the roads, things like that. That's what we're here for. And to see that the $500,000 is not in the budget, not something in the long-term plan. So in my mind, I'm thinking, well, if your long-term plan is not to be movie theater owners, then what is your long-term plan? And could that be something that the public knows about? If your long-term plan is to do something else with that property, it would be nice as a taxpayer to know about that, because certainly it's not part of, it's not what taxpayers, I would say, you just heard a gentleman saying $500,000 would make a big difference in the roads. I'm not sure about $500,000 for a movie theater, and I would urge you not to move forward with this. If you really want to be in the movie theater business, at least come to the public and tell us how you're going to pay for that and what are you not going to do as a result. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to address the council on this subject? Okay, come on up. And again, name and city, please.
Suzanne Roner, Anacortes, and I have nothing prepared because I've been asleep at the wheel on this issue. But I want to echo Linda's sentiments. We had an opportunity for a business to take over that theater, and the city council blindsided that whole effort, and I spoke out against that. And now all of a sudden it seems to be a good idea to sell the building, but to the city. And so I question your motivation for doing that and what your long-term purpose is. I always thought that you wanted the land for housing, for the stack and packs, and I would like to ask that question. I would like for somebody to answer it. I know you can't do it now, but my email is suzanneroner@hotmail.com, and I would love to hear from at least one of you. Thank you.
And just for members of the public, the purchase and sale agreement is for the building itself, the movie theater. It will be negotiated. The lease with the current tenant to continue to operate the movie theater is in that purchase and sale agreement. Anybody else wish to address the council on this before I turn it over to the council for deliberation and possible action? Council.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Moulton.
I have a question for Ms. Swetnam. It's about the feasibility study and the inspection of the property. Do we have a sense, could you actually go back to that slide, please?
Of course,
Thanks.
yes.
Do we have a sense of what the limits of that would be? So inspection of the building and systems, well, everyone can read it, but what's the point at which the city would say it's too much? This is failing, that's failing. What are the parameters for that?
Well, I think that's what council would decide. The plan here would be that the feasibility issues would be evaluated, that information would be gathered, and then we would come back to council, provide council with that information, and you would do that analysis about whether you think those issues are too prohibitive to move forward with closing. So.
Yeah, we're not asking council to give me the authority to close the deal yet, just to execute the purchase and sale and then do the feasibility, and then we'll bring all that information back to council for final closing authority, if that makes sense.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
Well, I'm in favor of executing this deal. I think that the council's objective probably is, and we'll hear from the rest of council, to continue to operate a movie theater there. I don't think that we should have gone down that path, but that path got started almost 25 years ago. So that is where we are today, and the community is pretty invested in that operation there. Our objective in purchasing the property is to make it the messy arrangement that we have today go away. The property owner has talked about how they've entertained a number of offers on the property. We are aware of 2 of them. One of them was to build housing. One of them was to operate an art center. And we had problems with both of those. And we didn't allow the lease to be modified for those. So here we have an opportunity to clean that arrangement up. We have an opportunity to get a longer-term lease arranged with the tenant. If we get that done, then we have a way to finance this without causing an impact on the taxpayer. Completely agree with the gist, if not the conclusion, of Ms. Martin's comments. If we don't find that we are able to negotiate a significant lease with the current tenant, then I don't think I would be in favor of actually closing this deal. I would probably reject the feasibility period. But assuming that we are able to work that out, I think we can probably make the theater more viable, clean up this arrangement, and do it all without exposing the taxpayer to additional costs.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. So originally the feasibility study, I think the date was, we had till October 4th, and now it's 30 days. I'm assuming because it's been brought to council that that is something that staff feels is reasonable?
Right. I mean, it's ambitious, but if that's I mean, I think there was some pushback originally. We put in 60 days for feasibility, and the seller countered with this lower time frame, and the mayor and staff talked about, these items that need to be evaluated during the feasibility period, and think that those are things that can be accomplished during that period of time. As Councilmember Walters mentioned, if we're not able to provide council with information that meets council's satisfaction, then closing doesn't happen. So yes, I guess in answer to your original question, it's ambitious to think about negotiating a lease during 30 days, but we'll certainly do everything that we can do from the city's side to work through those terms.
I appreciate that. It seems to me that it just instinctively feels rushed. And if things occur or are revealed or discovered, that might put us in a tough position. So if I had the choice, which I don't, I would strongly recommend to go back to October 4th, because this has been brewing for a very long time, and I don't see how it benefits us with so much else going on that staff is tasked with to rush this through. So I would advocate to go back to that October 4th date, or if not 60 days from the date. I don't see what for me, I don't understand the urgency of that.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Fantini.
I just have a couple of points. One, I agree with Ms. Moulton wholeheartedly in that last point, that I think that, this has taken way longer than even since I've been on council. That's been 7 months. So I feel like having the time to make sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted is essential. I also want to say that I don't think, I'm very much on record that this is not my first choice, was not my first choice, is not my second choice. First choice for me was to change the lease for the art center. I would have liked to have seen that done. Second choice for me, I know Mr. Walters mentioned it was a housing thing, but that wasn't what came before us here at council. It was just a straight sale of the property from movie theater to movie theater. that would have been my second choice. I feel like for me personally, this is about the best that we're going to be able to do to get out of this mess altogether. I also feel like it is essential that we can't move forward unless we are able to negotiate an extended 5 years with that new, or not with the new, with the current leaseholder that's operating the theater. I think that's really important, just from the sheer point of that. If we're going to take out $500,000 in debt, we're going to need to be able to turn the profit and get some money out of that theater to repay the debt, so that it doesn't cost us more than we anticipate. So that's really key to me. This is a tough one. The thing that I do like about this is that this puts the control of that entire plot of land building back into the city, and does get us out of kind of a messy lease. I do want to state, and I'm not speaking for anyone other than myself on council, I have not been a part of any discussions on turning that into anything. So whether there be discussions about housing happening, discussions about, I mean, I've heard all kinds of wild rumors, who knows, maybe even a zoo, I don't know. But I personally have not been a part of any discussions on the future of what that building should be. For me, if we move forward and execute this gives us 5 years to, number one, find out if the movie theater business is solvent. I think that just an industry as a whole, we're going to know a lot more about this in the next 5 years. And if not, if it's deemed that the movie business continues to trend in the way that it is, then I think that would be the time to have appropriate public conversations about what the council would want to turn that into. But as of now, I am not aware of any of those discussions taking place, which is appropriate. So thank you.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Young.
Thank you. This has been a difficult position, first of all, to be in for both the party wishing to sell and also the city. At the crust of the discussion really is, what are we attempting to do? And do we, as a city, have an input or a stake in what happens on that property? Part of that answer is yes, because we're the underpinning owner of the property. The other side of that is where I struggle. And I think I've made that pretty clear in the previous discussions, that I don't believe it is the function of a city to decide which businesses succeed and which don't. I think that those are stakes between a willing buyer and a willing seller. I've always been open to changing the contract to the lease in order to make that possible. Because again, if the goal is we want a theater here in our area, that sounds like that, for me, would be a private conversation that we will look for a buyer willing to come in and do whatever it is we want done. But that's not necessarily a city function as a priority. Yes, we care about it. Yes, it matters to the very constituents we all represent and the type of quality of life we want. I would love for the city to be here, but I don't necessarily believe it's my responsibility to try to fund a building that may eventually be torn down. I mean, unless we're going to run a theater. And so I struggle with that. But I'm also struggling with trying to figure out where we go from here, because I'm not clear, I'm not aware, also as Mr. Fantini said, of any further discussions or any discussions about what potential uses would be for that property. I'm just not aware of it. I would bring it up, if I were. But I do know that one of the original groups to try to get the property had a vision for it being an art center space and maybe some artist spaces to live and work on the top. Now that's what I sort of heard, but I never saw any drawings associated with it. But I believe that's under credible authority. My struggle here is, do we have the money, the $500,000? I think it's a fair price, but I still struggle with, why would we as a city take this upon us when there are other buyers out there? And so, given all things are equal, the only thing that would differentiate the two is the fact that we will have control of the property. And I'm not sure why we would want that in the immediate sense. Yes, it's been a mess from the beginning, but life in any city is clearing up messes from the years before as new rules and regulations come into play. That's what we do. I get it. But I do think, though, that if we are here and if the cost of this is really to correct an issue, I'm still struggling just a little bit. But I will execute what I think is in the best interest of this city and my duty as a council member. But I wanted to be on the record again one final time, is that I do agree with Ms. Linda, and I agree that, if we're doing this for the theater, what stops us from doing it for a couple of others? I mean, how do we choose? So, again, that's just where I am, but I just think that it's a lot of money, and I think that conditions have been met to ensure that we do have a theater for as long as we have a theater, but there are cities across this nation who's lost theaters. They didn't want to either, but there are options to try to provide that option. So for me, I think the undergirding principle for what's really taking place is control of the land, and then what do we do? But, again, I'm not aware of that, and I'm not suggesting that others are, but I am saying that those are the only differences between the two that I can ascertain. Thank you.
I know not everybody on council has spoken yet, but since funding has come up twice, maybe since our finance director is here, it's important to let the public know how we would intend to fund this. Mr. Hoagland.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and members of the audience. So I have reached out to a banker that we've done business with in the past and got just to verify that we'd be able to get a commercial loan on kind of a short-term basis if we needed to produce cash quickly. There's no trouble with that. I also reached out to our financial advisor that we've used in the past on bond issues. He's happy to do some work for us as well. He suggested a couple of options. We could go out to bond, which is not an option I would prefer. It gives us a much less flexibility on the terms of the loan, but also he could either get quotes or put out to bid for a commercial loan and obtain funding that way. So the banker that I spoke with about this suggested an interest rate, very worst case scenario, would put us on a 20-year note about $41,000 a year in debt service. So from what I understand of the workings over there at the theater, the revenue sources would be sufficient to meet that debt service.
Yeah, and that's the part I wanted you to say out loud in the public forum, is the intent would be to fund this, whatever vehicle we choose would be with at least payments from the tenant operating a movie theater.
Mayor Miller?
Let me make sure that everybody else on council is weighed in. So Ms. Cleland-McGrath, you want to go now?
Sure. As one member of council, I look at this proposal as a way of the city buying back the right to control the property that they own under that building. I think this is the only situation, I know it's the only situation we have within the city where the city owns the property and a private entity owns the building. There aren't going to be any other option. There isn't going to be a situation where this happens again, and I'm hoping that we don't put ourselves in a situation in the future like that. So I take issue with us saying that we're trying to play winners or give favors to a specific business, because I think what we're really trying to do is make sure that we fix the issue we have. This allows the original intent to continue, which we've heard from the public that they would like to have a movie theater. We are not tipping the scales of having it be successful or not. All we are doing is making sure that the operator, if they want to stay, has confidence that it will continue to be a movie theater. What we found, or at least I found when it was coming to the committee level with both of the most serious proposals, one was the Art Center, the other being a theater with some kind of housing, was that neither could put on paper confidently what they saw for the next 5, 10, 20 years. And because of that, I felt like we were going to be put in a situation where either the art center, the art group, or a private owner would have to come back to us and say, hey, this isn't working. We don't have an operator. Now we own this building and you own the land and we want to do something else with it. So how do we then have to sit there and tell them they can do this or they can't do that? And that's a problem. They also, the way the current contract is written, they don't actually have any parking associated with that movie theater. So if someone wants to go and put a different purpose, how does that work? How do we address those issues? So this kind of allows, and also if the building is sold to someone else and we modify the contract and the operator leaves, that new building owner is in breach of contract with the city. So then what do we do? Do we just take the building back? Do they just hand it over to us? We're put back in another really difficult situation. So I think that it's important. This is our attempt to try to clean up a messy situation. And I'll say it because I've heard some rumors and it was brought up. There isn't any discussion. I haven't had any discussions of future uses for that building other than what's come up from the two building owners. I mean, yeah, if you own property and we know there's a limited amount of land, at some point it may get to a place where a movie theater is no longer the highest and best use for our city and we need to go in a different direction. But that's not something that's been discussed. And I think that at least personally, when we move forward with this, if we do, great. If the movie theater can stay and the operator can make it work and we can make sure that it's a fair amount of lease terms and that it covers the cost of acquiring the building, I think that we can probably find a reasonable path to move forward. But I would say that, yeah, I do think the feasibility period is short, but I also think we should probably have the option. We can go back if we can't get all of our questions answered or information we need. We go back to the seller and we say, hey, we're doing our work. Here's where we're at. Can we have another 15, 20 days? But I would like to, as a council, to be able to make sure that we look at the inspection and we consider the funding sources and how we are going to service the debt before we make that final decision.
Mr. McDougall and Mr. Fantini, I will come back to you. Mr. McDougall, do you have anything? Okay, you're not required. I'm just making sure you have that, Ms. Hubig.
Most of mine questions and concerns went around the lease, the budgeting, which Mr. Hoagland answered. Yeah. And then I also just want to echo, I'm a little concerned about the 30 days in the feasibility study as well.
Yeah, I think I've heard that from the majority of council on the feasibility. There are two options. You know, one, you could just direct that you know, we change the purchase and sale to a 60-day, or like Ms. Cleveland McGrath said, we can just work with the seller, and if we need time that we're not satisfied with the information we have during the feasibility period, and then we're not satisfied with the feasibility study and we ask for more time. So 2 ways to go. Mr. Fantini, thank you for your patience.
I have a question for both of you that just kind of came up as we're talking about this here. One, so you said it was a 20-year loan with $41,000. What, can you just break that for me one more time?
Sure. Yeah. When I spoke with the gentleman who I talked to about potential funding, the interest rate was just kind of an estimate, and he gave me what he considered to be worst case scenario and a 15, 20, and 25-year scenario, which worked out to $49,000 a year on the 15-year scenario, $41,000 on 20, and nearly $37,000 a year on the 25-year scenario.
So just as I'm doing some quick math here, sounds like the middle scenario, the $41,000, is kind of where you're more leaning. So as I look at that, that is $820,000. Is that accurate? 41,000 at 20 years. What is that? So we end up paying how much? I guess is what is our final price estimate? Because 41,000 at 20 years ends up being $820,000. So basically, the $500,000 loan becomes $820,000.
$320,000 in interest.
300.
There you go.
Oh my God, what rate? That's got to be a pretty decent rate. Okay. Question then for Ms. Swetnam, because I think Ms. Cleveland McGrath brings up some good points about like what happens if we, like, had we sold that building, let's say, or if it ever sold to a different again. And they're like, oh my gosh, we can't make this business work after year 2. What happens? Like, do we then just go into litigation over what they can and cannot do? Do we have liability? Is there a clear path in the lease that says like, well, if the business owner can't do it, then the city just gets it back? Is there any kind of remedy in there like that for the lease?
You're talking about if somebody other than the city buys the building?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the answer to that would be to kind of go back to the lease agreement, and the lease has got a number of provisions that kind of address a number of different scenarios. We've got language in the lease that says that the tenant's required to use the facility as a first-run movie theater. So if somebody says, you know, I can't do this, I mean, I think most, as Ms. Cleveland McGrath brought up, I mean, somebody would come back and ask the city for a modification to the lease to be able to make something different work. But if council did not agree to a modification of the lease, then there would be, you know, a breach of that agreement at that point, and then there are provisions for how to deal with that. And if somebody's in breach and it doesn't get cured, then the lease can be terminated, and that's the end of it. And
then it would have just reverted back to us for free?
Well, yeah, I mean, free is, but we
I'm
wouldn't
sorry,
have to buy the building.
I'm definitely not, but
yeah, I mean, but at the same time, you know, if a tenant's getting, you know, in default in the lease, I mean, they can destroy the building as they're walking out the door, and then, you know, we're left with the dirt and the space. So.
Okay. Mr. Walters.
Yeah, to expand on that scenario, in the event that we don't purchase the building and they sell the building to somebody else and they continue to charge a large amount of money, much, much larger than the amount of money that we collect in rent for the land, and the theater goes out of business, they will assumedly look for another theater. And if they're unable to find one, they'll be back in front of us and they'll say, well, we just spent $550,000 buying this building, so you have to let us do something else. And that would not fly in an arm's length business transaction, because in a situation like that where you have a lease, the property owner would say, no, you're obligated to follow this lease. You've collected rent for 25 years on this building. You know, what you've made your investment, and then they would sue each other. Here, we would have to authorize litigation. We would have to take that step as a city council. We would have to engage in a debate about whether or not we want whatever potentially fantastical other thing that the new next owner wants to put in the building. In the alternative, we just buy it. And I agree with Ms. Moulton that 30 days is not the ideal feasibility period, but it is what we have an agreement on, and completely agree with Ms. Cleland McGrath that typically in commercial property arrangements like this, you might get to the end of your feasibility period, find out you need more time. We can then negotiate that or not be able to negotiate it depending on the willingness of the property owner. But at the end of that process, assuming that we have an agreement with the theater, the cinema operator, that allows us to extend their lease, get their agreement, and pay for this acquisition, at the end of that, we've acquired a city asset on city property. And in the alternative, we also have not spent any money. And in both alternatives, in my mind, we don't actually spend new money because revenue that comes in is paying for the new building. If we don't get to that arrangement, I wouldn't support it. But in the opposite alternative, where it changes hands privately and we are not involved, we don't get the city asset. So just weighing the alternatives here, it's pretty clear to me that this is the path that we ought to try. By signing this purchase and sale agreement, it doesn't guarantee that we get to the outcome that I described here, because we got to go through the feasibility period. We could be back here in 30 days saying, well, didn't work out. But it gives us 30 days to try it. And that's why I'm in favor of moving forward with this right now.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Young.
Thank you. I agree about the 30-day, you know, it's such a short period, but it also is an indication of where we may or may not go from here. My challenge again is the idea that we would pay $500,000, which I think, you know, and then add in the financing costs, which would generally come us up to above $800,000 that we would be paying to correct an issue. And that doesn't guarantee that the operator will be able to operate a business for a sustained period of time. So if we're talking about a 20-year finance, and we're talking about a 5-year agreement, those two things, I'm struggling with the fact that we would be paying $800,000 to take possession of city land, or at least more control. But we still don't have a guarantee that the theater will be successful and operate. So if the theater fails and not able to get the revenue that they need, you know, through whatever methodologies they use, ticket sales, popcorn, whatever it is that they do, we're still going to be left with a building that we paid a lot of money for, and unless we're planning on someone else plans to run a theater, we're still caught. So either way, we're still going to be back at this point. And it, in my opinion, would cost us as a city a lot of money, 20 years adding up to $800,000 just for the right to be able to control our land doesn't guarantee that we will have a theater here 3 years, 4 years, 5 years from now. It just doesn't. And so for me, that is the question. I know the intent is very good. The intent is good. You know, council really does try its best to do what's best for the city. I really do believe that in my heart of hearts. But I struggle a bit with the fact that we would pay $800 and something thousand over 20 years for the right to our land, and it doesn't guarantee that the owner of the theater or whatever it is will be able to guarantee that they will operate and be able to give us money for debt service. That's where I'm not adding up, and so that's where I struggle. I understand everything else.
Mr. Young, you have correctly identified the risk that is before the council. As somebody who's been a landlord for 28 years and a commercial tenant for 15 years, you have correctly identified the big risk in its tenant performance. And but also Mr. Hoagland has correctly, I believe, correctly identified the proper financial vehicle for this, because it gives the council the most flexibility Even if it is 20 years, that doesn't necessarily mean if we go with some sort of bond, those are typically 10, you can't make a decision until 10 years. So that's the risk before the council to make the decision, one of the financial side.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. McDougall.
I actually do have questions. So last time, I think basically I voted to do nothing essentially, and that's really ultimately because I felt like I didn't actually understand kind of the cost benefits of making the change. And I'm still kind of in the camp of do nothing. And so I'm curious, like it sounds like, you know, if we do nothing, if the building owner finds a tenant who agrees with the terms, the building owner sells it, we're good. Like we still have our funky, you know, agreement, but it is what it is. If the building owner doesn't find a buyer to agree with the terms, what's the worst case scenario? Is that the legal action that Mr. Walters talked about?
I think the worst,
inferred?
yeah, for the seller, the worst case scenario would be not being able to find a buyer that could meet the assignment, you know, restrictions that they have the movie theater experience, and they would be unable to sell the building then. You know, they would still be on the hook for the monthly payments that they make to the city pursuant to the ground lease, and that runs through December 31st of 2026. They have an option to extend that for an additional 5 years. You know, without somebody in there generating revenue, it's probably unlikely that they would want to extend that. And, you know, at the end of the lease term, they no longer have the right to occupy that ground. So they, you know, theoretically could take the building with them, but, you know, more likely you don't take buildings with you, and then the property would revert back to the city.
So in that scenario, which sounds like a really, you know, not good scenario for the building owner, for the city of Anacortes taxpayers, the worst case in that scenario?
Well, I think the city of Anacortes
It's a very speculative question, so I apologize about that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, so until December 31st of 2026, there's still this legally enforceable ground lease where, you know, the building owner would have to continue to make lease payments. So that income would still be coming in, and then at the end of that lease, that income stream would go away, and, you know, the theater would no longer be there. But the city would then have control of the asset through that direction as well. So then it would be, you know, up to council to figure out what, you know, what's next.
Ms. Cleo McGrath.
Thank you. I think that we're trying to show our best of intentions to keep it a movie theater, because that's what, in theory, it was originally this agreement went in. We've heard from the public. There is currently a lease that goes through 2026 for the operator to continue to operate. I think the hard thing is that unless the operator wants to buy the building, the way our lease is written, who's gonna have the experience? You're gonna have to kick out the operator so that you can be the one to operate. Like, it just doesn't quite make sense. So taking the next step is we put ourselves in a situation where we have a significant litigation between the building owner and the city, and that can cost a lot of money, and not only money for outside counsel, but also just staff time and ill will. I think that I want to be clear, I don't want to put too much pressure on the operator, like, to make this happen. I mean, I think the intention is that we would like to be able to find a successful way of keeping the current operator going and having a movie theater available to the public. But if for some reason that's no longer a good situation for the operator and for the city, that is a building that can either be leased out to some other. If we're talking about $41,000, that's less than $4,000 a month to have it covered for the foreseeable future. The other thing that we keep hearing about is we don't have enough parking. So one of the other options is if we get to a situation where we don't want to lease that property to that building to a tenant, and we're sitting here getting complaints about not having enough parking, we can get rid of the building and have more parking. I mean, I think that we have to be realistic, that we don't have to have necessarily the end goal right now, but I do think this path makes the most sense to clean up a mess and give us some options for the future. But I do think that building, there's some strange floor issues, because of the seating there, and it's concrete, but you know, I think we could make it work if we need to figure out how to have that loan service, but we just need to move forward. And that means doing our due diligence during that feasibility period.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
Yeah, I'm in favor of moving this forward because it costs us nothing to sign this agreement right now. It creates this 30-day window where we have a binding agreement with the building owner. There's been a lot of discussion about the financing strategy here, but we don't have a financing strategy yet because we haven't had those discussions with the cinema operator. Once we have those discussions with the cinema operator, which can hopefully take place over 30 days, and if not, we'll assumedly ask for more time, then we may be close to a much better financing strategy than what has been described here, because the building owner currently is collecting more than double or almost double the loan payment that Mr. Hoagland described. So that dramatically reduces the total cost of the building. And so I think the financing strategy is something that we figure out in the next 30 days, not at this meeting. But we don't have an opportunity to do that unless we approve this purchase and sale agreement now. I move approval of the purchase and sale agreement as presented.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Walters and a second by Ms. Hubick to authorize the mayor to execute the purchase and sale agreement for the purchase of the movie theater building on the city's behalf. Any additional discussion? Mr. Francis? Mr.
Just a
Fantini.
quick request. When you're doing the, or if it would be possible, when the financing is being done, that we look at when we're looking at revenue numbers and potentially generated revenue numbers, that we're looking at the number 820,000, not 500,000. That would be great.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? All right, Mr. Franciac, vote please.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Ms. Hubick.
Yes.
Mr. Fantini.
Yes.
Mr. Young.
No.
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Good discussion. And of course, as we move through the feasibility study, I'll be bringing back the information as soon as we get it. Thank you. No further agenda items before the council. I'll adjourn tonight's meeting. Thanks.